During the meet and greet, I was talking with someone, and they informed me that there was a rugby game this morning. Now, many of you know I'm not a rugby guy, so I thought he said, "Did you wake up to watch the game?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, he must be talking about the Premier League, talking about football." But apparently, there's a rugby game, and it was at 4:30. So he said, he said people might be falling asleep during the sermon, so I might need to shock and wake people up at some point, which is a bit worrying because as I was studying for today's sermon, I thought this is one of the strangest sermons I've ever prepared for, because we're looking at the minor judges today. And normally when you're preparing a sermon, one of the difficulties is there's so much written and there's so much information and there's so many commentaries and so many things that you're kind of wondering, how much more do I need to read to study on this? But with these guys, it was a kind of a case of every resource that you open, you look at it and it goes, there's not a lot to know about these people. And every resource kind of starts like that. And so as I was preparing this, I was like, man, I feel like this is going to be the most boring sermon I've ever prepared. So I don't know if that's going to help in people that have been up since 4 a.m. to stay awake. But nevertheless, we'll go. Maybe I'll just yell or something at some point if I start seeing people fading. So if you have your Bibles, please get them out. Let's turn to Judges chapter 3. We're starting in verse 31. We're looking at the minor judges, which they're called the minor judges just because there's less written about them. And we're going to look at all the minor judges this morning. And we'll go through it pretty quickly because, like I said, there's not whole lot. So first of all, chapter 3, verse 31. After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. If you look up on the screen, you'll see just the list of all the judges and including the minor judges. Next slide, please. And you'll see how dispersed among the major judges, who are in red, you can see these minor judges, and you can see there's not a whole lot about them. And so the first one is Shamgar. Now, Shamgar, interesting thing about this guy is that this is not a Jewish name. This is a Canaanite name, and the son of Anath. Anath was the sister of Baal. This was a goddess of war. So what the indications we're getting from Shamgar, this guy, is perhaps a Gentile, maybe not an Israelite. And then it makes us wonder, is this another sign of more Canaanization? I don't know. And then it says he killed 600 Philistines, and that kind of, if you've never heard the story of Samson, you'd read this and be kind of go, whoa, what's going on here? This guy killed 600 Philistines. Is that all at once? Was it in one fight? I don't know, probably not. I imagine that's his life stats. At the end of his life, he killed 600 in total. There's a professor, Jack Stassen, and he reckons, for whatever reason, like I said, there's just not a lot of information to go by, that 600 is probably a number that's just to say a large army of people. So it's not that he literally killed 599, 600, okay, no more. It's probably indicative of this guy was a warrior, killed lots of Philistines. And then he did that with an ox goad, which was a farming tool, which kind of looks like a spear with like this little blunt thing at the end. And then you read this one little verse about Shamgar, and you wonder, is it there to tell us? So I read some other resources around it, and I kind of felt like in every resource or every sermon I looked into about this, because there's just not a lot of information here, most of the things, I just felt like they were, pulling out a little too much out of the text than what was actually there. And so we read this and we kind of go, okay, is this passage in here trying to tell us that kind of God can use any kind of person to save people? Maybe. That he would use this Gentile to save Israel? Maybe that's why it's there. Is this in the text to tell us that the people were so Canaanized that they turned away from their own leaders and looked to foreign leaders to save them? Maybe. I'm not sure. Let's go to Judges chapter 10. Judges chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. I don't know if anyone here plays bingo, but I feel like you could do a church bingo of like, oh, the slides don't work, or the microphones turn off, or someone's phone goes off whenever I'm preaching. Okay, Judges chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. After Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Pua, son of Dodo, great name, a man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamir. So a man by the name of Barry Webb, in his commentary, he outlines that how after the chaos of this guy Abimelech, it was just bloodshed and turmoil. In this passage, the lack of any kind of wartime commentary probably suggests, okay, now we've entered a time of stabilization and a little bit of peace. And his name, Tola, it can mean worm. And so it's in the Judges, the people's names are really important. They're actually saying something about the people. And it means his name means worm, and it's probably suggestive of this guy being a humble, behind-the-scenes kind of leader. Not your kind of Samsons up the front and smashing lots of people. But he was a humble, behind-the-scenes kind of leader from the tribe of Issachar, which, if you read First Chronicles, the tribe of Issachar, they were described as people of who understood the times. So the tribe of people who were wise and smart and kind of could read the times. And so, again, all of that's kind of suggesting some kind of contrast to Abimelech. Tola just quietly led Israel well in a time of peace. The next one, verse 3, chapter 10, verse 3. After him arose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. And he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Camon. So all this talk about 30 sons riding 30 donkeys, 30 cities, basically this is talking about wealth. So it's I guess today's equivalent would be like, this guy had 30 sons and all 30 of his sons drove Teslas, or it's just some equivalent like that. They were really rich, really wealthy, and had good things. And so after the stabilizing leadership of Tola, Jair, it seems, had a period of peace, of regional power, and I guess of prosperity, because with all this talk about cities and donkeys. And so, is this a sign of God's blessing? Maybe. Is this a sign of more straying away from God? Because probably in order to have 30 sons, and the daughters aren't even mentioned, but in order to have 30 sons and some more daughters, it's probably not coming from one woman. And so is this a sign that this guy went around, took many, many wives for himself? I don't know. This is all the information that we have. Let's go to Judges chapter 12, verse 8. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters, and he gave in marriage outside his clan. And 30 daughters he brought in from outside for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. Again, so this guy, also rich. All this talk about donkeys and marriage and all that kind of stuff. It's all talking about prosperity. An interesting fact, which really, that's all it is. In the Talmud, which was like the writings and teachings and debates of ancient rabbis, some people suggest that this guy here, Ibzan, is Boaz. From the book of Ruth, Ruth and Boaz. They speculate this might be Boaz. I don't know what to do with that information, but I thought it was interesting. But the author seems to make a point. You see up there Jair and Ibzan. Seems to make a point that the judges before and after Jephthah were rich. Is that significant? Probably. I'm not sure. We don't have a lot of information. Again, there's no talk of wars, no talk of anything, any conflicts or anything like that. So again, it's probably suggesting that his leadership was through politics, it was through family. All this talk about taking in daughters and sons and da-da-da. So it probably led in that kind of way. And actually, the Jewish historian Josephus, he wrote about Ibzan that this guy did nothing in 7 years worth noting. Great. Verse 11, after him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. You'll notice 3 times Zebulun is mentioned there. So is this indicative of his strong family ties to Zebulun? Perhaps it's indicative of his localized leadership. It's not ruling over the whole nation, but just, in certain areas. And again, Josephus, about him, he says, and I quote, he did nothing remarkable. Next one, Abdon, Judges chapter 12, verses 13 to 15. After him, Abdon, son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons, who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died, and he was buried at Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the hill country of the Amalekites. Again, super rich, came and did his thing, and then died. And this is the information that we have on the minor judges. I guess we could end this sermon here, but you're probably not all that edified and equipped from that. We leave going, okay, there were some guys and they did some things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why this was included in the Bible. Why were the minor judges included in Scripture? I'll give us 3 quick reasons. First of all, I think there's a historical reason. The historical reason being that it's just giving an account of history of, hey, we want to chronicle who were the judges of Israel at the time, which ironically has a lesson for us, and it's ironic because the lesson for us is that not all the Bible is written for us. What I mean by that is we read the account of these guys, and they, in some part, it was just written just to keep a historical record of what was taking place. And we have this danger or this tendency, particularly in the West, where we read Scripture and we kind of moralize all the stories and we put ourselves into the stories as if we're the main character and, this is written about me kind of thing. And this point would suggest, actually, no, that's not the point of why we read about Tola. It's not so that we can read about Tola or Elon and Ibzan and go, oh, I need to buy my grandsons a Tesla. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Like, we can't read the Bible and just kind of always put ourselves into it as if we're the main characters and it was written to me. No, that's, in one part, it's just historical, keeping a historical account. There's also a literary reason as to why these guys are mentioned. So Pastor Andrew mentioned in one of his earlier sermons about how in the book of Judges, there's just a cycle that is going on. The cycle where the people kind of rebel and then they realize they've messed up, and then they kind of call out to God, and then he raises up a judge to rescue them, and then the judge dies, and then they just keep repeating this downward spiral. And what we see in the book of Judges is this cycle just constantly happening. But as the cycle happens, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And it just starts degrading even more and more and more. Robert Bolling, in his commentary, talks about how even in the actual language itself, even in the Hebrew, as the book progresses and furthers, and as the people just degrade more and more, even the language, the writing, becomes more broken and more simple and more fractured to kind of convey this idea of Israel just straying further and further away from God. And so there's this downward cycle constantly, and what the minor judges do is they seem to echo the same themes of the book as a whole, of Canaanization and this kind of stuff, but also they kind of like commas or full stops in between cycles. In a literary way, it seems to work like that. It signifies the end of each cycle. So there's a literary reason, and finally some kind of theological reason of bringing the number to 12. I think Andrew mentioned this in one of his messages, of there are 12 judges to kind of indicate, hey, all of Israel, we're all indicted in this. The failings apply to all of us, not just a select few people in the land here and there. So these are some of the reasons that we can read the minor judges and go, okay, this is some reasons why this is here. Let's look at some theological reflections that we get from this. One of the difficulties of preaching such a text is, if you're teaching something from Paul, where he's writing a letter with kind of all these imperatives saying like, hey, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. Instead, only speak words that are going to give grace to those who hear. Okay, that's kind of easy to read and understand what we're supposed to do, right? And when we read stuff like this, we have to kind of figure out, okay, what are the theological principles that are true to that audience, but also still carries over thousands of years to Western 21st century here in Browns Bay. And so I've come up with 3 things that I think we can deduce from this text. 3 theological reflections, theological truths that from this apply to us without kind of going, okay, Tola did this, so I need to do that too. So the first thing, I think, is that God raised up the right people for the right time to take care of his people. Now, God raised up the major judges specifically. In the specific cases of each major judge, you can go to the text and see a specific moment where it says that like God raised this person up to do this. With the minor judges, there is no such talk of anything like that. It just kind of says, oh, and then there was this guy Shamgar, and he just happened to do his thing. Oh, and then this person led Israel, and then this person led Israel. Actually, for 2 of them, it does in the ESV, it does say that they arose to lead Israel, but even then, it's a different word. So with the major judges, God specifically raised them up, and the word for raising them up is different. It's one that speaks of like an outside agent, God doing it. And for the 2 minor judges where it says that they arose, it's a different word. It's kind of more just like, at that point, this person happened to be the leader and judged Israel. So God, whether it was specifically or whether it was providentially, raised up the people that he needed to carry out his will. And so the point of mentioning that is that, okay, it reminds us we're supposed to trust God's wisdom and his sovereignty and that he knows what he's doing. And so it didn't matter whether they were Gentiles or whether we think they were good judges or bad judges or whatever. Like the idea is we can trust God, because in the New Testament, Romans 13 is going to tell us that actually all authority that's been raised up is from God, that God raised them up. And so I think the takeaway for us is, okay, I know we are in New Zealand. I know we're not the US of A, but probably most of us have taken interest in US politics, and it's like, okay, elections are just around the corner, and, it's just the worst time of the year, isn't it? But, it's almost like, okay, whether the White House is red or blue, ultimately, it doesn't matter. Like, we can still trust God. Whether Christopher Luxon or whether, I don't even know who the Labour Party leader is, whoever that, Sam, whether Sam or Chris gets into the beehive, it's like God is still sovereign, Christ is still on his throne, The gates of Hades are still not going to prevail against the church, and our mission to go make disciples is not going to change. And so, yeah, okay, whoever wins these elections or that elections or whoever comes into power, we can actually just trust God. Trust God, His sovereignty, and trust His wisdom. Now, if you're not into politics, that's okay. Clearly, neither am I. Someone will tell me who the Labour Party leader is. This theological truth, I think, has bearing on close at home in the life of our church family too. Because when Andrew told us that he was going to be taking a step back from his position as the senior pastor, and we did interviews and stuff, and the elders offered me that position, one of my hesitations was like, oh, okay, like following from that act, like, you know, that's big shoes to fill, and I have small feet. So like, how am I going to do this? You know, and that was one of the things I ummed and ahed about. But two reasons why two primary reasons why I said yes. One of them was I looked around, I saw our staff team, and I saw our ministry leaders, and I thought, okay, you know what? We got some fantastic people. We got some wonderful people in this church who are just such great committed saints, and they pour their heart out into the ministry and say, okay, we're in a pretty, any transition is hard, and church life is always hard, but we've got some wonderful people who I truly believe will be like heroes as we, go into the next season of our church. So there was that. But the second thing, more pertaining to this point, was that even though, like, I look at myself and I go, like, who am I? I'm just some some grown man with a weird obsession with a Portuguese footballer. Like, who the heck am I? But I looked back and in the last 15 years of leading at this church, I know that I can trust, if this is true, I can trust that God has prepared me and provided for me and equipped me and to bring me thus far, and will do so going into the future. And so even though I look at myself and I'm like, who the heck am I? It's like, okay, actually, I can trust God and that He's worked through the elders to bring me to this position, and it's about trusting God, that God is going to do what He needs to do to get His will done, and you can trust His wisdom. The second point is that for living for God is not about personal gain, but it's actually, who would have thought living for God is actually about God? As I mentioned, as I tried to read about these guys, it's so hard to find any information. And I think the point is that we're actually not supposed to know so much about these guys. I think that, for some of the other guys, there are plenty of information and we can know about them. But for these guys, I think we're not supposed to know who they are. Elon, for example, he judged Israel for 10 years, but we don't know anything about him. And in fact, for most of us, when we think of Elon, we probably didn't even know that name was in the Bible, and we just know because of Elon Musk, right? And it's like, okay, that's fine, is my message. I think that's fine, because the purpose of the Christian life, the purpose of living for God, isn't for our own fame and to make a name for ourselves, but it's actually to honor God and to live for Him. He came, He did His bit, and He died. When I was a teenager, a song came out. And in the song, it said, I see a generation rising up to take their place with selfless faith. I think that prophecy was a false prophecy. Because my generation, we millennials, we did not rise up to take our place with selfless faith. When I look around at my peers, most millennials didn't rise up to take their place with selfless faith. On the large part, turned away from faith and deconstructed our faith and turned away from serving God. And I think one of the reasons for that, it's complicated, but I think one of the reasons for that is because we millennials, we were sold a lie. I think we were sold a lie because we were told, you're going to change the world for God. You're going to do amazing things. And what we heard from that, what we interpreted from that was that, oh, you're going to be famous. You're going to sell out stadiums. You're going to plant churches with thousands of people. You're going to lead worship in packed out arenas. You're going to have this awesome social media following, and you're going to change the world for God. And then what actually happened was we lived real life, and it didn't compare to this. And so we're disillusioned thinking, oh, okay, is maybe this Christianity thing's not real. Maybe it's all lies because, I was promised that I'm going to change the world for God, but I have to go to my 9 to 5 and repeat that. And people were disillusioned. But what I'm trying to say is that was a lie. We believed a lie. Because what 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 11 is going to say is that actually Christians, we're supposed to just live quiet, peaceful, faithful lives. And that's okay. That's what Christian living is supposed to be. Living for God is actually quiet and peaceful and ordinary because the reality is that's the life we're all going to live, right? I look around in this room and I don't see any celebrities. I don't see anyone that has a social media following of thousands of people that's packing out arenas. We all just live ordinary, normal, quiet lives. And what I'm trying to say is that's okay. That's what God actually expects of us. That's what Christians are supposed to do. Quiet, ordinary, faithful lives that honor God. And so we look at these guys like Elon and Tola and all that kind of stuff, and say, it's not about them. It's not about Gideon. It's not about Samson. It's not about Elon. Actually, it's just about living a quiet Christian life that's going to honor God and point people to Him. The third point I think that we get from this is that every judge lived, and they died, and they were buried, and it's pointing to a greater Savior, a Savior who died and was buried, but rose again. You see, you read the account of these minor judges, and it says things like, and then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. Then Abdon died and was buried in Pirathon, the land of the Amalekites, and so on and so on. It tells us that every single one of these guys, they lived and they died and then they were buried. And that's the truth. That's the truth for every single one of us. That at some point in God's appointed time, we spend time here on this planet and then we die and we're buried. And so I think some of the ramifications for us for that is, number one, is we should live accordingly, in accordance with that truth. That it is appointed for man once to die and then comes judgment. And so, okay, we need to, this is why things like Christmas and lights are important, because we want to tell people about Jesus. We want to point them to Christ. But also in terms of just everyday obedience. Okay, if my Lord, the one who defeated death, says that we are to live our lives in this kind of way, I better obey him. But also when it comes to putting our hope and trust in things and people. You see, whether it's Christopher Luxon or Sam or whoever it is, or Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, your husband, your wife, your pastor, whoever it might be, if we're putting our ultimate hope and our identity in these people, well, we're in for heartbreak because everyone lives and dies and is buried. So what is our only hope in life and death? Is it Christopher Luxon? No, it's not. Our only hope in life and death is that we are not our own, but we belong to God. That we belong to God. So right now, I want to ask the communion team to come on up as we prepare to eat this bread and drink the juice. This is something that Christians do. And as we do it, it is a physical, tangible reminder that our hope is not in Trump or Harris or Andrew or Han or Mark or the elders. Our hope is not in any of these people. Our hope is not in our job. Our hope is not in our children getting athletic scholarships or getting a great job to take care of our retirement. Our hope is in Jesus Christ, the one whose body was broken for us, his blood was poured out for us. And every time we eat and drink that, we're reminded, I belong to him and he belongs to me. So as you eat and drink today, would you worship in your hearts? Would you just honor God and thank him and be reminded, put our compass right and be reminded, okay, as we go from here today, this is where my hope and trust is. Not in any earthly human judge, but in Jesus Christ.